Hello and welcome back. This is Richard Golson, your host, and we are working with NetLab 24 using vSphere Lifecycle Manager. We're now at task 4 where we will add our ESXi hosts to the VLCM cluster. And so let's go ahead and get started on that. So when we left off, you can see that we had created a cluster where we enabled both DRS and lifecycle management. And having the DRS allows the cluster to migrate the VMs off of any host that goes into remediation, meaning that the host is going to have to go into maintenance mode where it can't support running VMs. So we got to get any running VMs off of the host before it can actually remediate it, meaning take it into maintenance mode and then check it, do a pre-check, and then actually do the remediation or update. So let's take a look. Now you can see here I could add hosts from here, but before we do any adding of hosts, let's take a look at the build. So we saw earlier we can take a look at the build by hitting this link or just going to updates for the cluster. And we can see the image. The ESXi version has been set to a build 163, etc. So you can see the build there. Let's see what's actually configured on the ESXi host. So if I click on the ESXi host 1, we'll see that its build number is 15, etc. And if I look at this one here, ESXi 2, it's also using the same build as ESXi 1. We can also look at the updates. And so if we look at updates for ESXi 1, because it's not part of the cluster, the updating is specifically on the host, and you can see that we have this build here. And it's the same as this one here. It's the same build we saw earlier on the summary page. Okay, now the other thing is when we're actually adding the hosts into this DRS cluster with lifecycle enabled, we're going to need to put the host into maintenance mode to do that. And you can see here that I have a virtual machine running on this host. So before I can actually migrate it over, I should put this host into maintenance mode. Let's see what happens if I don't. So I'll go ahead and select the host. And then I'll select maintenance mode, enter maintenance mode, and it gives me a little blurb here. And it mentions that I might need to power off or migrate my VMs from the host manually. Because of the host isn't part of a DRS cluster, it might not be able to actually use vMotion and move the host or the VM, the running VM, to the other host. Let's see what happens when I click OK. And then it tells me that there are one or more powered on virtual machines on the host, and it will only proceed once I've powered off or migrated the virtual machine to another host. So I can go ahead and click OK, and I'll go ahead and select this, and I'll just shut it down. So that was just to prove the point that we actually have to ensure all the VMs are shut down. I'll go ahead and shut that down, hit the yes on there, and then we'll wait till that's fully shut down before we do the migration. Correction, I wanted to wait till it fully shut down before I actually put it into maintenance mode, but the great news is that once I shut it down, it did finish the maintenance mode finished putting the host into maintenance mode. Let me open the recent task, and you can see that it entered maintenance mode, but it couldn't complete that until I initiated the guest OS shutdown. Let me take this second host, and I'll just go ahead and take that right into maintenance mode. And so you can see that. You just click OK here, and I should see that that one entered maintenance mode. And it goes in pretty quick because we're not shutting it down, but it's no longer available to support running VMs. Okay, now that I've got them both in maintenance mode, you can see that here and here. I'll go close these up. It'll make it a little easier to see that. Let's go ahead and we're going to add the two hosts into the cluster. So to do that, one of the easiest ways is just to click on it and drag it into the cluster. And then it simply asks me about root resource pool, and you can ignore this since we're not using resource pools in this lab. It can just go into the root resource pool, and I'll just say OK. And then I'll drag my second one in. Before I do that, let's take a note of this message here under updates, image. The image of the cluster is changed or the host is added. So we're just telling us that essentially we should see that because of the host image does not match the VLCM cluster, or we've changed it, we have to do a check compliance. But before we do that, now that we've moved those in, let's take them both out of maintenance mode. And so I'll go ahead and select the first one again and exit maintenance mode. And I should see that on here, and notice how quickly that completes. And we'll go to maintenance mode and exit maintenance mode there as well. Now that I've done that, I can go ahead and power on the two virtual machines. Each one is going to run during the process or during the rest of the tasks in the lab. And this just shows how DRS is going to work together with Lifecycle Manager to move the VMs off of any host that goes through remediation. So we'll go ahead and power this guy up as well. So we've now got our two VMs powered on, and both our hosts are in the cluster. And at this stage, we'll be able to then proceed to our next task, where we'll update the hosts using the cluster image. And as you recall, the cluster has a very specific image that it's using here. And as you saw earlier, our two hosts, we're using different images. So when I do an image compliance, I'll actually move this from an unknown state to another state that we're going to see here. So let's go ahead and get ready for the next task.